My name is Jarosław Kuisz. I'm an editor-in-chief of Kultura Liberalna weekly. So it's an NGO located, based in Warsaw, Poland. I'm also a researcher at the University of Warsaw, also chercheur associé étranger à CNRS in France. And thank you for having me here, first of all. What I've learned about you that you're in an interdisciplinary group of people of all walks of life. So it's the beauty, I think, is that I hope we will have an interesting discussion. So what I'm proposing is to tell you a couple of things of what I'm doing since the last February, because it turned out that everyone has its own task according to our profession and capabilities. And then I would like to hear your feedback according to your professional background, and then maybe we'll have some, I'm sure we'll have some interesting outcomes. So the moment of the beginning of the war turned out to be an event that virtually changed the geopolitical dynamics in our part of Europe. That's an obvious thing. But I would like to share with you some thoughts of many elephants in the room that we have, because we tend to think of the war, we would like to think of the war as having two sides. Maybe I'm oversimplifying, but having two sides in this geopolitical confrontation. This is, to say the least, much more complex, and it's of utmost importance to understand that there are also some important differences within, so to say, on our side. And this is what I propose you to ruminate on, because that's what I'm doing since virtually 1 year. I shared with you the article I wrote for the New York Times. It was an attempt to explain a lot of differences between the Eastern Europe and the Western Europe, and also the United States and other countries. Many things changed in the meantime. It doesn't mean that but still there is a lot of things that we should share. And so what I'm proposing is to show you 3 points, 3 steps perhaps, even better, that we should highlight to understand these differences. Maybe we will view it otherwise. Wonderful. I'd like to hear your feedback. So the first thing about translating the experience of Eastern Europe and the experience of war to our Western allies, the first challenge is that we have a very important and returning difference of interpreting the war. What I mean is that the war could be framed intellectually in many ways. What we see clearly, and it was perhaps more visible at the beginning, but it's a recurring interpretation that is coming back, is that we could understand the war as a separate particular event or as a process. The event or the process. What I mean, at the beginning of the war, many politicians, including President Joe Biden, wanted to stop the war as soon as possible. It's easy to be understood, because what they meant, what they bear in mind, was that on the other side of the front we have the superpower with the nuclear weapon. But that's the beginning of our divergences, because in fact not only President Joe Biden but many other politicians and intellectuals thought that this is the event that should be kept at bay. Let's stop it as soon as possible. There are only victims. It's the horror of war, as known in many, on so many different occasions in the past, should be stopped as soon as possible. For them, I dare to say, the war from the very beginning was treated as the separate event. It happened, no one is going to deny it, but it should be stopped. In Eastern Europe, maybe with a kind of oversimplification, but let's move forward to the second direction. The war was largely interpreted as a part of a process, of a geopolitical process. It's not an event. It's another step in on the way that was already coined. And here the point of reference could be different, but this could be the war in Georgia. This could be the Second Chechnya War. That it's another step in the development of the neo-imperialism. So it's not an event that you could stop by a political, diplomatic decision. It's a part of a large process that, in fact, could be only frozen but not stopped. You see the point? That it could be frozen but not stopped. So when I'm trying to explain it to my colleagues, here I say that we could see it as a process that started with the Second Chechnya War, for instance. Yeah? But in Eastern Europe, and here when I participated at the conference in Tallinn, we could have talked on a broader historical scale that in fact it's 300 years of a process. I mean, we've been there. What I mean, when, for instance, when we are talking that at the beginning of the war, so many of us were surprised, perhaps surprised, that we are talking again about pro-Moscow puppet leaders that should be put on the government side. Yeah? What we have in Georgia, for instance, now is interesting. We have puppet leaders, we have political kidnapping, we have forged elections. Then, for those who have the historical background, we've been here. It's 300 years. For instance, a political kidnapping of officials, of the state officials, that's what was right in the middle of the 18th century, in the first Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. That was exactly what happened. So it's when we heard the news that from Eastern Ukraine the state officials were kidnapped, it was again. I mean, it's the reality, because we could give you the example. Okay, there were senators that were kidnapped right in the mid of the 18th century from the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and there is a memoir by one of the most prominent Polish Enlightenment era intellectuals, and he says that when I was a youngster, I remember it as a trauma. Interesting. That's the 18th century. So Julian Ursyn Niemcewicz, just to give you the name. So this is not an anecdote. This is to highlight the differences in the framing, political framing of the war. It could be seen as the process, and here the point of reference that goes back in time could be the Second Chechnya War, but for people from the region, very often it could go much further back in time, you know, and it would be justified in many ways. When we have the discussion, I could give you more analogies that are really striking. Then, so this is the first point, an event or the process. Then What it means? It means that we are moving to the second part of the story. The second step is the political actions that are being taken. It means that, in fact, depending on how you interpret, depending on what is the framing of the war, you tend to take up different political actions. That was perhaps the most striking moment was at the beginning of the war. I could give you again the example from March, so a long time ago, but it was really striking. It was exactly the same week when the leaders of France, Emmanuel Macron, and Germany, Olaf Scholz, they held a joint call with President Vladimir Putin to stop the war. And just days later, at the very same time, you have the three prime ministers from post-communist Europe traveling to Kiev by train, and that was the moment of danger. So again, it's really striking. You know, that's the same week. To ask what is the background of the politicians that are taking so different political actions seems to be justified. What is more, the political actions from March may seem already remote. Nonetheless, it means also that a kind of political agenda is again here influenced, and up to, I dare to say, up to now, by this historical, geographical, and political background. Here I use the term for the region, not only for Poland, because Poland is just an example here, but I think that, especially traveling not only to Ukraine and talking to our friends 2-3 weeks ago, but also to the Baltic countries, and I think I introduced the term for myself, and then I shared with others that we should talk about the PTSD Sovereignty region. That it's post-traumatic stress disorder sovereignty that we are sharing in the region. We could talk about the nervous sovereignty all over the world, namely the Brexit, the justification of Brexit. Let's take back the control in the United States. A kind of nervousness is everywhere. This is still different from the experience of the region, where so many countries disappeared from the map. And it means that it's not about a kind of sovereignty that we are defending sovereignty against globalization or Europeanization. It's something else. It means that in the past you were erased from the map and you could be erased again. What is more, this is such a profound experience that it is transferred through the texts of culture. It is transferred through the public and private sphere. You have it in the it's behind the political actions taken, but it's also behind the motivations of individuals in their private life. You could see it. Kaja Kallas, the prime minister, gave so many interviews, so many important interviews to the Western press. And what is striking is that when she's talking about losing sovereignty by the Baltic countries, it's absolutely blurred the public and the private sphere. It's non-existence. And for her, it seems to be quite understandable, because when you lose sovereignty, your family goes to Siberia. That's perhaps the shortcut, but that's what she does in her what she presented in her interviews. And that's not only about the Baltic countries. That's again, that's the regional experience. And to lose the state, here I was for quite a while as a researcher, I was interested in the collapse of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. And it turned out that when you are looking closely to the documents that you have from the past, it's absolutely fascinating to see that people suffer when they lose sovereignty as individuals. There is a very moving story about the last king of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. He was forced to abdicate. So the last document that he sent as a king was to send it to his ambassadors all over Europe and to write the sentence that was unprecedented. After 800 years, the state ceased to exist. And that was like, you have no routine for such political actions. And that's what he sent. And then he signed also the act of abdication in Grodno, now in Belarus. And then he had 3 days of physical experience. That is, it's in memoirs that he suffered physically afterwards. That he had a kind of, it was an experience that was traumatized. You know, after 800 years, the state ceased to exist. So, and then a Russian ambassador who was largely responsible for what happened, Repnin, he noted in a letter, and that's really moving as well, he noted, now we see the vanity of human experience. And that was, and he was moved as well. You know, in spite of everything he did, he was moved as well. Okay, that may seem a remote experience from the 18th century. The point is that that's the experience for the region that was a recurring experience. Even we could talk about the trauma caused by the cyclical loss of statehood in the region. Because that was the remote example, an interesting one, but for the countries of the region, much more important would be the First World War or 1939, and the loss of sovereignty. So, and the consequences of it. So, it is, again, striking how it influences the region. Until the war, when we are talking about the Central Europe, we focused on the Visegrad Group countries, isn't it? Yeah, it was like, to understand the region, let's focus on the Visegrad Group countries. The war came, and we see that the geopolitical reshuffle happened. Hungary is somewhere else. Regardless, I mean, I would like only to take a picture of it. So it's absolute. It makes no much more sense to talk about, in geopolitical terms, to talk about the Visegrad Group, because the reshuffle happened. What is interesting to see that the countries that were traumatized in 1939 have an alliance. For instance, there was a moment, an extraordinary moment of the discussion about the necessity of introduction of the visas for Russians in the EU. And what happened? The politicians from Finland to Romania were talking the same, they were really preaching the same agenda. It's really unusual. It's really unusual. When you see how close not only Poles and Ukrainians became, but when you see a kind of unity and alliance from Finland via Baltic countries, Poland, Ukraine, then to Romania, you see that there is a real reshuffle, and it's founded not only on geographical closeness to Russia, which is obviously on stake, but it is also the question of this regional trauma that is recurring, and there is a deep mutual understanding. It's absolutely striking when you travel to the countries like Estonia or Finland now, that we understand each other, and you have a kind of feeling that it's almost as an instinct. Yeah? Obviously, intellectual, it's a nonsense, but it means that Okay, so it tells you how much the history that was transferred in so many ways, in public and private, influences your framing of the world. So this is the second point, yeah? The second point, the political actions that are taken in accordance with the people of your country. Yeah? And obviously, the political actions here, I mean also the reaction of Poles to the refugee crisis. Yeah? It's absolutely, you can't understand it without the history, the background of history. The Polish-Ukrainian history is full of difficult moments, and all of a sudden people understood that this is the moment to put it aside. That's the greatness of thing, that it is something that Paul Ricoeur called incognito forgiveness. So, among intellectuals, you could ruminate on the details. You know, you could say, "Oh, it's not to be." There are so many difficult moments. You can't go on without counting this or that. But people simply put it aside. Incognito forgiveness. It means that, well, you know what? Now there are people in need, and so let's discuss it maybe later or maybe never, but the point is that we are living here and now, and we should do something about it. That's the beauty of this concept of Paul Ricoeur, incognito forgiveness, because it becomes an experience, shared experience, and therefore it could be the point of reference, a positive one, fortunately. So this is the second point, and the third point, that is perhaps the biggest elephant in the room, and it's going to be visible in the future. We had the first point, process or the event. The second point, the huge difference in political actions that are taken. The third point, that is, in fact, the consequence of the two, is the expected outcome of the war. My goodness, this is the huge elephant in the room. Because, and it's ahead of us. Again, a kind of oversimplification. In Eastern Europe, I dare to say, people think that if it's the process, the outcome, the expected outcome of the war should be a response to the process, not to the event. I mean, it's a huge, not intellectual, practical implication. Because it means that what is expected, I talk about it in Tallinn with our friends, they expect to put Russia where it was in 1991. Poles would agree, not to mention our Ukrainian friends. Let's put Russia where it was at least in 1991, if not before the Soviet times, I mean after the First World War. You see the point. When I participated at the meeting in Lvov, and our friends were presented the whole list of possible outcomes of the war, and including the disintegration of Russia. So we are talking about the differences of the framing, political framing within the NATO states, not about the Russia viewpoint. I haven't even touched it. It's something that is almost unthinkable for many politicians in the West. There is a political danger, geopolitical danger, nuclear weapon issues, the stability of the world at stake, and many, many other points of importance, including economic ones, including the supply of raw materials, and maybe we could discuss it. But it means that the third point is possibly, imagine, let's do one exercise of imagination, that you know that Vladimir Putin proposed a fake truce 1 month ago. It was because of the Orthodox holidays. It was largely fake, but the point is that it should make us really think, what if he proposes a real truth? That would be a huge bone of content for the Western alliance, a real one, because if you see the different framings, well, that's not what is expected in Ukraine. That's not what is expected in Estonia, or even Finland, I dare to say. So I think that this should be perhaps put more to the forefront, because if not, people would, I mean, it should be the point of discussion, because if not, we will be surprised. And we know who can be interested in this turn of events. It doesn't mean that it's an easy issue to be solved. Perhaps it's even too early. But the point is that something like this may happen anytime soon. Therefore, we have these 3 points, and we have the permanent task of translation, the region, the Eastern European experience, to our colleague from the West. Many understand it. After a year, we see that, again, there is a process of understanding our viewpoint. Happily, this is something that was not obvious in February or March. Remember that so many experts on Russia were mistaken until the 23rd of February. Well, people are making mistakes. Usual thing, but the point is what we are doing about it. Yeah. So the question of translation is still on stake. I could give you one more example. That, again, this is a short presentation, but one more example is that there are terms and phrases that are, in fact, the line of thought is the same, but the phrase is different. You know, it's like the old wine in new bottles. For instance, there is this question: did we provoke Russia by the enlargement of NATO? My favorite question. Yeah. But this is a serious question. I mean, I had a real clash with Jeffrey Sachs at the Athens Democracy Forum. I mean, this is something that is real. There are people who are thinking in that terms, and they are powerful in terms of the intellectual influence. I mean, they are. But if an argument uses itself, then it will come back in disguise. And now, do our actions lead to an escalation of war? I mean, if you think about it for a while, it's the old wine in new bottles. We should not ridiculize it, because these are questions of importance, of utmost importance, and the point is that I feel like a miner, you know, it is a minefield of the language that we use to describe the war is evolving all the time. So we should carefully unpack it for the obvious reasons, at least for the obvious reasons for the Eastern Europeans. And I believe that this is the something that you are doing here. I mean, this thought of translation, this thought of building bridges among us to share this, because it doesn't mean that Eastern Europeans are correct all along with their warnings. They are also making mistakes. Perhaps to have the high moral ground, is one thing, but to be efficient could be another thing. So this is much more complex. It's not that I'm to say that one side or another is right. It's quite the opposite, is that we have the knowledge of the reality, we have different framings, and the task should be to build a kind of a bridge, because the war is real. And the very last moving example, and perhaps I will close this part and we'll discuss the issue together. When I was in Lviv the last time, we were there was the Ukrainian officer said that he was tired. He came to refresh himself in the west part of Ukraine, and we talked a lot about the cannon fodder of Russia. Yeah, that Russia. In other languages, it's the artillery meat. Yeah, cannon fodder. That Russians are sending troops, and regardless the lives of individuals, you know. And again, it turns out that the question of translating the experience to ourselves is a permanent task, because what the officer said, Ukrainian officer said, he said, "I'm tired. How many Russians could you kill?" I mean, and this is such a task to translate these experiences to each other. This is the reality. This is the reality of the war. It's not an abstract thing. So I will take the liberty of closing this part, and if you have questions, I'd love to discuss it with you. What do you think of it? Maybe you are critical of this viewpoint, but I'm happy to hear your opinions and also take notes. Thank you.
I just have a question, maybe. I don't know if it's methodology, or I would just start. Like, for me, I thank you very much for this overview. Yes, I very much agree. First of all, for me, it's so interesting that you use like this the notion of the PTSD, and coming back to the trauma. Mm-hmm. Now at the very end, like you were speaking about the individuals, like the soldiers, like being traumatized. Today in the morning, we had a very beautiful and moving, touching interview with a Ukrainian soldier who was speaking about like not seeing his family, trying to be more caregiving in order not to become like harsh in this reality. But my question actually was that the thing, like, in speaking about like the nation states, be it Russia, be it like the Baltic countries, Ukraine, and so on, of course you are transposing like this trauma onto like those entities. Mm-hmm. And for me it would be just interesting, like in building this kind of, let's say, identity or psychology even of states, like how can we like approach this methodologically? Sorry, like, mm-hmm. Can a state have a trauma? If so, how is this trauma, I don't know, saved, secured, conveyed, and also what can we do as individuals, like, to work on this trauma, like, mm-hmm. on this, like, the clash of the scales?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for. Well, this is the super interesting question. I tried to explain it. My book is soon to be published in the UK, the New Politics of Poland. I could methodologically, I worked the other way around. I realized that in the 18th century, you have some reactions of people involved in the process of, seeing the dying state, that it was not framed from the viewpoint of our language. The language of traumas has been really developed by researchers. You have the great book by Didier Fassin and the other name. I don't remember, but Rechtmann. But the point is that I worked the other way around. I realized that people reacted to the collapse of the state in a way that was surprising. You know, that I talked to you about the king, but there were many others. That it was a process of understanding what happened, because many people were not. It was like, well, the states don't die. Yeah, you could take a part of territory, or in the 18th century, what was popular was the social contract theory. So when the state disappears, largely the people of the Enlightenment thought, okay, it would mean that the people disperses. So the individuals would found themselves under the umbrella of other sovereigns. And what happened is what you have in the national anthems of Poland and Ukraine, by the way, is the Polish has not perished yet. It's fascinating because it's 1797 in Polish case, and if you think of it, it's the answer to the question that is hidden. I mean, it's not asked, does Poland still exist? Who knows? Yeah? People were not certain. I mean, 1795, of course, we don't have the public opinion service, we don't have sociological data, so we are looking for the old documents. And for instance, there is a poem of an obscure poet. Poles doesn't know him, he's so obscure, but it's fascinating to read. Oh, Polish woman, you should not give life to the children. The state disappeared, and it doesn't make sense to bring new children to the life. I mean, it's okay, and he went even further on. It's how about old heroes of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the military heroes? They are enslaved in their graves. So I mean, okay, it may seem bizarre or interesting, whatever one wishes, but the point is that you see that a certain process of understanding of the framing started. For the region, it meant, for Poles, for Lithuanians, but also for other people from the region, it started to understand what it means to be under this umbrella of the other state. And you have, in the case of Poland, it meant the recurring collapse of the state, because when you have 1939, we mentioned it, by Polish historians, it is called the fourth partition of the state. It's the term that is widely used, in fact. It means that you refer to the first three partitions of the 18th century. So there is a kind of making a chain, link by link, to understand the collapse of the state. So you're asking about the methodology. I mean, I started from the experience and then moving forward to understand how we could frame this kind of an experience. And then at the end of the story, because already it's too long, the end of the story is that, okay, when we are talking today after February, when we are talking together with citizens of other countries of the region, we really understand each other easily with this geopolitical framing of the war. And it's like it forces you to ask the question, okay, so we are so much traumatized, and the term trauma seems to me appropriate, because when you remember, I mean, my education started at the People's Poland, yeah. So I remember communist times from school, and you remember the moment when Russian soldiers went away. It was, by the way, not 1989 but 1993. It was like to close the cycle that dates back to the 18th century in the case of Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, because that's the Peter the Great, the very same Tsar that is recalled by Vladimir Putin as a model. You know, so it was the thrills go down your spine when you hear it, and then you see you react to it not only on the intellectual level, but you feel the danger. I mean, so not to make it too personal, there was a lot of interviews were given by ordinary citizens after February, and for instance, there was a Polish peasant that was asked by The Guardian. He was asked, "How do you feel about it?" And he's living just next to Kaliningrad, and he says, "They will kill us in our beds." Okay, that was the quotation is exact. And then you realize, okay, but he's not in Ukraine, okay? He's not in Bucha, he's in Poland, the NATO country, the EU country. But let's not ridiculous him. What it means, he's absolutely traumatized. Then you have the article that was published by The Spectator, again, to understand each other, about the Baltic countries. You have the same set of opinions given by we will be next. We will be next. People are traumatized. This is not they are not expert in geopolitics. They are not expert in the humanities. They are afraid. We will be next. And what it means, that the cultural transmission of the past was so powerful that the guy who was perhaps born and brought up in an independent country is still traumatized. What to do about it, as you rightly ask, I have absolutely no idea. Sorry. I don't know. I don't know, especially that since February, it looks like the nightmares are coming back. So that's why I believe this framing should be even more highlighted, because we are not always right, even if we the high moral ground. We are not always right because of that. It could be even more. We could be even more mistaken because of that. But it means that the whole political framing, and therefore the political actions, and therefore the outcome that is expected, is founded on the historical experience of the region. And it should be really taken into consideration, because it's absolutely fascinating to see the example of Poland, where politicians, we are not going to talk about the political divisions in Poland that are so profound, the illiberal and liberal side, the divisions, on the verge of the civil war, whatever. The point is that the citizens reacted in the same way, regardless the political views. After the February, they started to give help to the people in need. Politicians were abhorred. Politicians were absolutely abhorred, because it meant that what it means, we live off the divide impera, of this old Latin sentence, divide and rule. And all of a sudden, 92% of the Polish citizens, 92%, you can't go further on with the public data opinion, are for being the member of the EU. And then go on with your illiberal agenda. Yeah? Good luck with that. So you could. And that's why, by the way, you see so many false steps and missed opportunities in foreign affairs in Poland. But that's, again, I would like to leave that subject maybe for later. That's not the point. For me, it's much more interesting is this regional experience that we could share and discuss. I don't know if that's the answer to you.
By the way, I was asking from a German perspective, and I think our intergenerational traumas, they are somewhere else. Like they are much connected to this Second World War, and I think we are at a very different place. So that might also be like for us, like so difficult not only to understand like this difference between event and process, but also to connect on an effective level like, to what you're like telling and speaking about.
I mean, it's such an open question. You know, I tend to understand where we are. At least, I mean, that's the very basic first step. I mean, to talk about perhaps the understanding. I remember, maybe that would be a question to you. I remember from the Deutsches Historisches Museum there was a panel, there was a map of the partition of Germany after the Second World War, and there were 3 parts. You know, it's for a Pole, it's like, oh, okay, interesting. Yeah, the partition of Germany is like, you know, the partition of Poland is ABC of your education in Poland. So it's. I wonder how much the partition of Germany could help to understand the Eastern European experience. You know,
I mean, one perspective that we were missing yesterday a bit, like in this talk about like the different historical places we come from, was actually the Eastern German perspective. And I think this is like an important part actually that maybe also we're missing. I cannot tell much about it. I'm too young for this, but I think there might be some connections. Although, like we have, of course, now in the former like GDR, like Eastern Germany, there's a lot of reluctance actually to support Ukraine, unfortunately. So
this is intellectually, isn't it fascinating? I mean, it's such a, I mean, it's an incredible task to understand it. Yeah, I mean, I don't have answers to that. I expect it from you. I mean. Any more questions or comments? Please share your experiences.
I have a question because I'm from Ukraine, and actually we've been talking a lot about how not to talk about only Ukraine intellectually and culturally, but expanding to the Eastern European and to reinvent Eastern Europe in a way. And this is actually a very good line of reinvention. I don't know if Finland wants to be a part of Eastern Europe. Maybe belongs to some Nordic something that they are constructing, as well as Estonia, which also wants to be a Nordic country, maybe not something else, but still. And we actually also talking about it in a hope that Poland and Baltic countries will have more influence and symbolic power and more voice than we are, because victims and oppressed and people who are fighting in the war are not seen as an agent in the West, as we have seen for now. But how do you think, is there some prospects and some future of this united foreign policy and this, for example, I don't know, Lublin Triangle stuff, for example, yes, or these common attempts to translate our experience, our shared experience, our traumas to the West, and how to do that, and maybe how to put on the table more radical messages, for example, and to push this agenda of process and not an event, because I think that for me, for example, and for a lot of my colleagues and co-citizens in Ukraine, it's pretty much evident that Russia could not exist in this form if we want to really finish the war. In this form or another form or something like that. But it's something unthinkable for the West. But I think that Poland and Lithuania and Estonia and so on have this power to at least suggest these possibilities. So maybe we should do something with Russia, make it smaller, make it weaker, demilitarize it, for example, something like that. Because before we started to speak about it, so the words start, no one will think about it, because everyone in the West, I think, cannot imagine. So Navalny is their best option, which is no, no for you, yes. So what do you think is the future of this shared discussion of the Eastern Europe with the Western Europe?
Mm-hmm. Well, unfortunately, it's an open question because we are in the middle of the process. I could, from my personal experience, I could say that I think that these 2-3 weeks when I was in Lviv, it was like we talked about that everyone has its own task at that very precise moment, and therefore it was even moving to see intellectual milieu from Lviv that they said, okay, they are our boys in the front, they are fighting for us, and we have our intellectual task to be done. So therefore, and what it is, I mean, we should really go to the West and translate our experience. And I think this is extremely powerful because eventually it's really founded on the public, on the Western public opinion that politicians are sending weapons, isn't it? I mean, it's eventually, and it's so fragile. It's so fragile because the people, you know, it's if the experience is so remote geographically, it means that you know, you have other things on your head, you have other issues. It was seen, by the way, in the public opinion surveys that were made after the beginning of the war, that there was the level of sacrifice that you could bear because of the war. And in Eastern it was like 80-90%. In France, much lower, to say the least. So when we had the presidential elections in France, it turned out that there were questions how much the Ukrainian war should, the topics that are of importance during the presidential elections. And the first point was the pouvoir d'achat. So it is the force of buying things. Yeah, and the Ukrainian war was like between 15 to 12% of interest. You see, I mean, so it is such a huge task to keep the level of attention high. The war is going on everyday basis. Every day you have people dying and wounded and suffering, and you have to, I mean, therefore, this is the genius of President Zelensky, that he is capable in spite of that, because it was much easier at the beginning when the shock was so huge that people reacted to it instantaneously because they wanted to understand Russia, the war, but now, you know, life goes on, and he's still capable of attiring some attention. I mean, it's so I tend to think that we have our tasks. It's virtually an everyday alliance of the peoples of the region, of at least those who feel that this is their duty. And you've mentioned Finland. I mean, guys from Finland were very reluctant to the very end, but eventually they applied to the NATO alliance. You know, this is, you can't go further on. This is the whole breakthrough in the foreign policy. In Estonia, obviously they would perhaps see themselves as a Nordic country more, but when you talk to them about the war in Ukraine, we are sharing the same viewpoint, and again, you see that they are seeing it as a process. They are seeing as the political actions should be tougher and more immediate. The Estonians were among those who were giving away their weapons at the very beginning. And look at that. And for them, to understand what we are talking about, Estonia is 1.3 million of people only. So, you know, they are absolutely traumatized. So we have this alliance of the direct neighbors, Russia's neighbors, and we have this the common agenda, and we have the common task that, you know, there are soldiers, there are intellectuals, there are workers, there are other people, and I mean, we have a task for everyone, you know, and this is the unique moment of unity. And if happily the peace good for Ukraine and for all of us comes, it would mean that we'll have other things to do. But that's such a remote perspective. That
I would have such a question referring actually to all the talks we had today. The Ukrainian soldier, Artem, and then I actually already wanted to say it during Lydia Gibado's lecture, the discussion, but didn't manage with time. So both you and Lydia mentioned this importance of civic society and how it dealt with the situation. And what Artem, the soldier, mentioned in his in the interview with him was that people who do not serve in army do very often do idealize the soldiers to somehow like cover their guilt in a way, or their lack of action. Then they romanticize and idealize the soldiers in the army. And what we experienced, like from, let's say, the activist point of view in Warsaw, it was pretty frustrating. The time that it took for the municipality or the government on the level of the state to take like any action or to react. Also the communication of the NGOs, the activists with the, let's say, the local level, so with the municipality was like super difficult, unsupportive, and we can of course keep on again idealizing, in my opinion, as well the power of the people, but that's also what the government did actually. First thing is that the government took over the, let's say, sort of a success of society that the society managed and used it politically. And I'm curious, what do you think? What is the lesson learned for the politicians in Poland, let's say, from this situation? If it made the government, maybe not government, because it will probably change soon.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. But the politicians in general, what were the lessons learned? So if it made them maybe more lazy and took the responsibility from them, or maybe like looking at the actions taken by the civilians and the NGOs, maybe we will be more resilient, hopefully not like next time.
Well, thank you for this question. It's, you know, obviously there are politicians and politicians, but one thing is undeniable. Without the civil society, and in a larger sense, because I'm running an NGO, so I have to stress it, that the civil society in the largest sense, so not only the NGOs, but the whole bunch of people that wanted to react, that felt the need to help the other, reacted during the first stage of the refugee crisis. And of course, the individuals that use the cultural codes of cooperation that are, interestingly enough, you know, in Poland, we share the cultural code of cooperating against the state. This is, by the way, the cultural code that is a part of this PTSD sovereignty. We appreciate even more the cooperation against the state. So you see, there's a kind of hierarchy of values that are appreciated most. So to do it against the state, it's very high. It's very high in terms of moral judgment. It helped. It helped because that was not perhaps this time. It was the widespread belief that the state is made of paper, you know, the common phrase used by politicians and people in Poland, translated itself, curiously enough, into the direct action. Because people, I mean, that was what I heard from so many guys, that you can't count on the state. No, 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 let's do something about it. No, and that was the background, intellectual background of real actions, that people, hundreds of people, thousands of people went to help the refugees, and again, women with children, because, you know, that was the case. So
it wasn't like the main goal wasn't the opposition towards the state, because as you said, like all the people actually, like most of the Poles help.
Yeah, so that's regardless they were not waiting. Believe me, that the first reactions in France would be different. What state would do about it? You know, and here it was the state would do nothing about it, so let's do something. And that was really instructive to see the people, and exactly if you see the turn of how the events took place, it was exactly the civil society in the largest sense, regardless the political viewpoints, reacted, and you know, if not, it would be impossible to acquire at a certain moment millions of people. So it was like, absolutely. I mean, the whole issue of acquiring foreign people in your house, to your private sphere, it turned out that, okay, let's do it. I mean, it was fascinating to see all my friends that were so engaged in that, and they were not thinking of the state. It was regardless or against. It depended. I mean, it was irrelevant at that point of time.
To be honest, for instance, I'm a researcher on the topic of affordable housing, and honestly, at that point, I was thinking about the state, and I also don't feel guilty for it, because of course it's very heroic to get people under your roof, people you don't know, being outside of your comfort zone. I also did it, but I was actually thinking at that point that we already had before, and we still have, and is developing such a housing crisis, and how could we be resilient towards this crisis, not making use only of private properties or private housing units, but I thought that maybe it would be like a lesson for the government or politicians to put this topic on the agenda, and I feel like
it should be the lesson. It should be the lesson. I mean, I agree.
It will not be because they were rewarded, actually. You know, they did nothing and they got the political capital for not doing their job. So I would argue that it would be very hard to have lessons learned, because usually the politicians learn through when they are slapped on the hands.
But let's turn our attention to the civil society, because I mean, it was so surprising, you know. Obviously, one should not idealize the normal people. I mean, there were pros and cons of that situation. But wasn't that so surprising for ourselves that people reacted rather with the tendency? I don't mean you have always the exceptions. We are talking about millions of people. But the tendency to help, I mean, it was so surprising and extraordinary, and it became an experience shared. Obviously, there are minuses of that situation. It shouldn't be like this, and the politicians should have reacted before. And yes, but perhaps the difference is that for me the bar of expectations is so low that I was positively surprised. Okay.
Sorry, can I have a question?
Yes, sure.
I'd like to go back a bit to the explaining our experiences and trauma to Western friends, because I spent last half a year in Belgium at Catholic University of Leuven, and I met a lot of wonderful people, both students and professors, mostly from legal world, and yeah, their understanding of our history, culture, our expectations towards them, and so on and so forth, simply doesn't exist in some cases. And I was wondering what kind of intellectual tools we could use on our daily basis level to influence them. Because I agree with you that the civil society is an important factor in changing the world. So I think that's an interesting part.
Okay, well this is a broad subject, because probably it depends on the country, how you translate it. In Belgium, it is possible, because you have the difficult unity of the country. I mean, again, the instructive thing is to go to their national museum. Absolutely mind-blowing, because it's how you are going to create a country that is so difficult to, for themselves to have this common identity. So they have the king and the queen and the monarchy that is unifying the country, but still there are so many divisions that are palpable even for foreigners. But for them, to be among huge superpowers is one thing. Then a possibility of a division of the country. Then the historical background of 1830 and 31, that in fact a part of the freedom is could be linked to the uprising that happened at the same time in Poland and Lithuania. So there are some connections that could be made, at least to introduce the subject of the sensibility. I mean, the very fact that at least, it's not my opinion, it's widely shared by historians, that at least partly the independence of Belgium could have happened due to the uprising in Eastern Europe, is at least a good starting point to show that, look guys, how important the Ukrainian war is for you. I mean, let's go through the process of intellectually understanding the whole chain of events that, again, we try to communicate, we try to communicate also through the negative experiences. And perhaps you remember, surely you remember that it was March, April, even May, that we are talking about, would Second Munich happen? Is it a phony war of 1939 that we have in the West? These were the analogies, negative this time, negative analogies that we have. And again, if there are limits, intellectual limits to use analogies, but of course here the purpose of such negative analogies was clear. It was to underline that the military inaction delayed the spread of the war across the globe in the past, but did not stop it. So eventually, it turned out that Belgium was not saved. Yeah, I mean, so with Belgium, it's perhaps easier than with some. Yes, but here is the difference is perhaps that focus of France is in the North Africa, and this is. I mean, I try to understand. And by the way, the Wagner Group actions in the North Africa helped to convince Frenchmen a lot, because when you see in Burkina Faso Russian flags that are spread in the city center against the French soldiers, you see something is there is a snag in it. I mean, who is playing behind the curtains? And then the Frenchmen started to think of the army of trolls that we all know. That is so. I mean, they are pretty efficient in the North Africa. in Mali, in Burkina Faso, and many other countries of the region, Frenchmen realized that it's not that the war the Ukrainian war is also waged, in a sense, in the North Africa. So one should not omit that Macron, the last week, 2 days ago, 3 days ago, he made a statement of support to Ukraine that was pretty courageous for the first time. I mean, it was. Let's see what will happen next.
And I can bring also perspective like about traumas, but from another side, because I'm also from Ukraine, but temporarily based in Portugal. And what I'm observing right now, and which I was surprised, and then this is country which like lost their colonia in Macau in 30s, I think. And after they had some business, like gambling business in Macau, but they was kicked off from there. And now it's more like China, like of course became more powerful, and also Macau have influence even to Portugal. But also it's a country which get to the some position of food country, and also like surviving through the crisis, and also had the position of late capitalistic development and not fully developed actually. In the right way, so that's why it's looked like because of that trauma right now communist party like really strong in Portugal, and there is a lot of people of like generation like from when they were young in 70s, 80s, from working class, they still have this resentment of the communism, so that's why there is some somehow the situation when they sympathize to Russians because they associated with the communists. At the same time, they just keep this moment of the trauma after dictatorship, which is like we can associate with the Russian regime right now, and just like at the same time, of course, like they have Ukrainian, like civil society react, but like in some emotional level, because just people coming, but like Ukrainians who don't have any agency, but like Russians are still like this image of the safers is like somehow still exists. That we were discussing about Germany and Gorbachev, and like that bring the freedom somehow. So it's what I also observe, like now located like on residency in a small city, and there are some Russian dissidents, and for example, like curators really want to like include them in the programs. So because I'm now trying to like bring some Eastern European perspective to the like Portugal, so that's why I'm just. It's
pretty challenging, yeah? Isn't it?
Yeah, it's like exercise.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's. Perhaps I would recall our friends from Lviv that, I mean, everyone has its own task at that time. So instead of being frustrated, it could be treated as a challenge that, you know, let's go on, let's because again, Portugal, geographically speaking, you can't go further on in Europe. But at the same time, I don't know what would I do, but I think that the question of dictatorship by Salazar could be really a kind of point of reference here, because for so many people it became a part of the legitimacy for the political system that is now present in Portugal, that okay, so the fascist regime of Salazar is a negative point of reference. It provoked wars in Africa and eventually the underdevelopment of the state and so on and so forth. So here it's clear who could be associated with the dictatorship. I mean, to fight for the democracy could be somehow translated to the fight of the democracy in the Portugal circumstances.
There is like such feeling that there is some fresh and really vivid trauma of this like low economical development, and they just trying to like explain it somehow. So that's why they refer to this.
But it's of importance. I mean, in the EU, every country counts. So this is so important to push forward the Eastern European agenda for the sake of the war. I mean, it's. But again, I mean, it's for artists, it's for intellectuals, it's for soldiers. I mean, it's such a huge. I mean, it's like when you take the book on history of Ukraine by Serhii Plokhy. I mean, it's like, okay, we are at such a turning point that you try to turn 300 years of history. Yeah? It's I mean, in 1 year. Let's be realistic. It's not possible, yeah? But it's happening every day, every day, every day. So perhaps, well, one thing is sure that these are the big history, big age is back. And the second point, therefore, we have to do something about it. Yeah, so. Any more questions, comments? Please don't hesitate, because if not, we're about to close our seminar.
I had a technical question about the source of the suffering of Stanisław Poniatowski.
Okay, I will give it to you afterwards. It's fascinating, you know. The guy had three days of what we would call a post-traumatic stress disorder, because he ruled for 30 years, and he thought that it would be possible to save the whole country. That was quickly changing. At the end, there is the book written by the British historian Richard Butterick on the very end. It's a beautiful book, on the very end of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and how quickly it changed towards the Enlightenment agenda. But again, if we are thinking about the historical analogies, it's like that was the moment when the Commonwealth started to change radically in order to get its own to preserve its own political its own policy, because that was different. I mean, you had three absolutistic powers around, and it was like having a democracy, or a possible democracy with a lot of defaults, but it was possible. So that was a clash of ideologies that, again, it's not... when you take a look how Russia how Putin would like to influence Ukraine, you see that it's not so remote, the patterns of actions, that when Ukraine became independent, it started to be so annoying to Moscow, like in 1792. And then the army enters. And you see, 2022, the army enters. Because the political development in the Commonwealth and in Ukraine in present became so annoying ideologically, because when you see, it's like with Taiwan. Does China really need Taiwan? Look at the map. No? But ideologically, it's horribly annoying, because it shows that it's possible to be a Chinese and to live under democratic rule. It's possible to be the Ukrainian and live under democratic rule. I mean, it's annoying. It's an ideological challenge that is very often overlooked, because we are talking about the economy, we are talking about the military. But it's, again, if you see the 300 years of our experience, our common experience, the ideological challenge is also of importance, because you see that people feel better under democratic rule. So what are you going to do about it, a tyrant? Yeah, and therefore, you see, in the spring of 2022, there was an unusual artistic demonstration that took place in the center of Taiwan's capital, Taipei, and in protest against the war. People pretended to be victims of Russian aggression against Ukraine. An artistic happening. It's such a beautiful thing, isn't it? So this is, it shows that it's, perhaps we're talking about the regional experience, but now perhaps we should be talking about the global experience. Thank you so much.